I would like to call to the podium Bill Murphy. He's the MD of Projitech. They do not need any introduction. You know about them in history. They were with us also yesterday to give us, because we could not finish his speech. He will carry on, and then thereafter we pick on the last three, and then thereafter have some time with the DDG. Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. Let's come through.
Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the good turnout in attendance today. As mentioned, Projitech, we are lift consultants. I just need to get over the advertising. We need to pay our rent, so I just want to put our name out there for you all to see. So, the subject that I'm talking about, and these come purely from my thoughts alone. It's my experience over the last 38 years. Working in the lift industry in one form or another. And one of the areas I'd like to touch on is when you own a lift, what are your responsibilities when you're the owner of a lift? And strangely enough, PWD have indicated a good understanding of of the responsibilities of owning a lift. And I applaud you for that, because it's good to know that there are owners out there who understand what their responsibilities are. I want to start this presentation by telling you a little story. And the story goes, 2 years ago, I was invited to do an audit of the lifts in a building owned by a bunch of attorneys. The head attorney who headed up the company happens to be a sitting judge as well. So, on doing the audit and presenting him with the findings of the audit touched on the actual lift installation itself, its service, its safety, and its compliance. When I wrote up the report, I write up a report on what we see and what we observe. The opinion is expressed at the end of the report. So everything in the report is something factual that we could see, and we could justify it as well. We could even take it to court and defend our report. The particular attorney at that time said my report reads like an indictment against him and his firm. And he asked me to withdraw the report. And I said, no, I actually cannot do that, because you do not understand your responsibilities when you actually own a lift. Quite simply put, I had to come with a very brief definition of what it is without going into all the clauses in the OSH Act and regulations. So, in essence, where there's a lift installed, you have a legal duty for the premises owner to ensure its overall safety, as well as the safe and suitable operation. In essence, what that means is if you own a building, and by implication you have a lift in the building, you are responsible for the safety of every single person entering your building, be it visitors, be it employees, or ad hoc visitors, or whoever, delivery people, that if they enter your building, that it is safe for them to enter your building, and if they have to use transportation, that it is safe to use that transportation. The OSH Act would argue as well, and I'm sure the DOL would put this better than I would, you also have responsibility for your own personal safety. So there is a dual role in there. But as the owner of the building, where you have an incident in the building, the first person that will be asked to account is actually the owner of the building. If you own a lift in a building, you need to be familiar with the legislation that permits you to install and operate the lift. You cannot plead ignorance about it. Now, this presentation is not to take you through all of those particular legislation that's involved, but I could name a few of them. You've got the main one is the Occupational Health and Safety Act, and you've got the lift, escalator, passenger conveyor regulations. But you cannot read it in isolation. The OSH Act has to be read as a complete document with all its clauses and all its regulations that apply to it. You also have building regulations that you have to comply with when you have a lift inside a building. You have a responsibility to trap passengers. You will have noticed that my surname is Murphy. Murphy's Law says that if you have a lift in your building, at some time or another it is going to break down and you're going to have people stuck in the lift. That's a fact. Ask me about it. In my career of 38 years, I've been stuck in lifts hundreds of times. It's something that we get over. It can be quite a traumatic experience though, for the first time, for anybody else getting stuck in a lift, particularly when the lift comes to a halt at high speed. So your responsibility to trap passengers needs to include plans that the passenger can communicate with the outside, or you can communicate outside in, that you alert the emergency rescue services that you're actually trapped inside the lift. Now take another little story of people getting stuck in the lift over the Easter weekend, when they had a bottle of water and a packet of Easter eggs. Fortunately, by the Tuesday when people come back to work, the Easter eggs are finished, the water's finished, and there's a puddle and a mess inside the lift. Why? Because there was no emergency rescue plan for those trapped passengers. So as the owner of a lift or a building, you need to make sure that you have those sorts of plans in place. And remember, owners of the buildings are not all corporates. The owner of the building could be a body corporate. It's not an individual, it can be a company. The company might be a faceless head of a company who is sitting in Germany or France or somewhere. But there needs to be those plans in place. You have to have a regard for the life expectancy, improvements and eventual replacement. Again, I listen with very interested PWD, listening to the problems that they're having with the lifts. A lift can be made to run for over 100 years, provided we still have the technical expertise to service it, the parts and the replacements. But that is only a part of the problem. Eventually, building characteristics change. So when we design a lift system, we may design it for 3 or 4 lifts in the building. As the building ages and it changes its shape, you may find out that the building is actually, its classification is downgraded. So it goes from a P grade building down to a C grade building, and the occupancy of the building increases. When the occupancy of the building increases, the usage of the lift goes up in proportion. So was your lift system designed for a lower occupation rate, or was it designed for a high occupation rate? So you have to take that into cognizance with the change of the building dynamics and characteristics. You also need to keep up to date with changes in legislation, standards and codes, and how that may affect your lift. So we now know we're on in OSHAC, the regulations for the lift was re-promulgated in 2010, where certain changes were made. So for instance, the access-only goods lifts are now brought into the legislation, and they now fall under the lift regulations. And that was a change. And it was very interesting when I speak to my client base, when I asked them, are you aware of the changes in the legislation where what we used to call goods hoists are now part of the legislation and have to comply with certain requirements by September 2020? Correct. Interestingly enough, not a lot of information is out there with many of the clients that have come across, people that have come across and say, are you aware that you have to comply with certain regulations by 2020? Some of them, yes, larger corporations, certainly the bigger property owners, but the smaller people out there, the small body corporates who may have a similar lift in their buildings, are totally unaware of it, which meant that there was a lack of communication somewhere. So I have a few general guidelines that I'd like to just share with you, and again, these are my personal opinions. On the legal compliance side, you need to list all of the legal requirements that you need to do to operate that lift. I don't want to go into deep discussion with them now because I could be here all day. But you need to say, as a bullet point, as an owner of the lift, under legal compliance, what is it I need to do? What information do I need to get? Where can I obtain it from? Excuse me. For instance, there was a discussion we had at the ASA meeting, which is the Lift Inspectors Association. In that meeting, it was asked, do you know where to get a copy of the OSHAT? Excuse me. And it was quite interesting that everybody was quiet until we said, well, why don't you just Google it? Because on Google, you can find a lot of information. You are legally bound to maintain your lift. That is written very clearly in the OSHAT. However, the OSHAT gives you guidelines. It is not the end-all and be-all of everything. There is a section in the OSHAT that says you have to do a risk assessment of your lift to determine the frequency that it needs to be maintained and what needs to be maintained. So when somebody comes to a lift company and they say you have to maintain your lift on a monthly basis, my argument there is to say no, it depends on the environment that the lift is operating in. If you're transporting in excess of 10,000 people a day as opposed to transporting 50 people a day, it is quite clear that the lift is operating a lot more taxing. So you need to be aware of the usage of your lift and how it affects the maintenance. You are required to have a comprehensive report done every 24 months. That is a report, an inspection that's done by lift inspectors who are basically employed by an accredited inspection authority. It is only the accredited inspection authority who can issue that certificate, not the lift inspector. The accredited inspection authority has gone through a rigorous exercise for accreditation, and then they apply to the Department of Labour for the privilege of inspecting lifts. And it's the Department of Labour who award that accreditation facility the accreditation to go and inspect lifts. Currently, I think we have about 16 accredited inspection authorities throughout the country, and it is a strain to get around and inspect all of these lifts. In that report, there are certain requirements of you that you have to meet. And generally speaking, when those reports are issued, there should be a discussion between yourself as the lift owners and the people issuing the report on what needs to be done. You have to have your emergency plans in place in your building, particularly when it comes to those lifts. So some of the plan might include, if there's no communication inside the building, I have to arrange for external communication. So that might mean installing telephone systems, or intercoms, or direct contact with the service provider. Inside the building as well, there should be a notification of who is responsible when somebody gets stuck in a lift. Who talks to who? You need to reassure the people inside the lift that help is actually on the way. Why I say that is because we have a lot of incidences with people who get trapped in the lift who attempt to rescue themselves. Therein lies the danger. The person trapped inside the lift who doesn't manage to force the doors open and jump out may not be aware that he's jumping himself into an unsafe situation. We have had incidences of people falling down lift shafts because they tried to extract themselves out of the lift. The best place for when you are stuck inside a lift is in the lift. It's not pleasant, but the fact is that you reduce your dangerous risk. And that needs to be communicated to people. You have to form a risk assessment of your building and the using of the lift. Now, the risk assessment, as I mentioned, could be on safety. What are the risks on safety? We have older lifts, for instance, still running 50 years old, where the floor levels are not always accurate. They drift between 1 inch, 2 inch in some instances. So you have a risk there. So you have a risk to the users. So you have a duty to inform people that sometimes this lift doesn't actually stop level on the floor. On the risk assessment, you might be looking at in terms of your maintenance and use of the lift. So you might determine that we have a high breakdown rate of these lifts. So in the risk, you might need to, for instance, have security or a facility inside the building. It may be determined that you need to have a service mechanic on site full time. Typically with shopping centres would have multiple lifts and escalators, where often people are trapped in those lifts for long periods of time because nobody's done a proper risk assessment to determine the usages over certain periods of the day or weekends. So a risk assessment is very important on using the lifts in the building, particularly if your building is going to be empty after a period of time. So typically after 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, the building may be empty. How do you know that there's nobody stuck in those lifts and they're going to be there overnight? Risk assessment could also go down to people with disabilities, on how you design or install lifts in the building to cater for people with disabilities. How does a person with a disability stuck in a lift, how do you rescue them? What is the procedure? As I mentioned quite a few times now, lift usage is a very important factor in your general guidelines. It is not acceptable just to say, I only have to comply with the regulation. You will find yourself standing in front of a judge with expert witnesses who will tell you differently. The usage of the lift is your responsibility. So let me give you an example. If you install a 600 kilogram passenger lift and it's designed purely for passengers, to use that lift for moving of goods, heavy duty goods, will not be an acceptable practice because the lift has been designed primarily for the transportation of passengers. To start using the lift now for the transportation of heavy goods, you're going to create an unacceptable risk factor. For instance, a normal passenger lift would be designed with lightweight sills, suitable for people to walk over. Generally, when we transport goods into a lift, we are transporting the point of load directly onto those sills that we go over that are not designed for that type of load. So it's very important that the lift in the building and the usage is defined and controlled. I'll give you another example. With a access goods lift, where you may not transport passengers, you use it for loading, you load the lift, you close the doors, and you send the lift to the floor. But because in the legislation it says that you have to appoint somebody who's in control of that lift. So you can't just let anybody in the street walk into the building and just start loading the lift and using it as they see fit. Because often we saw in reports in certain breakdowns of some of the lift providers, service providers, they have stuck and occupied in lifts that are not supposed to be carrying people. That tells me that that owner of that lift, of that building, has no control over that lift at all. So you have to have control over your lift, and it is your duty to ensure that it's used properly. Now, when I say it's your duty, that doesn't mean to say that you cannot appoint somebody. But as the owner, you have to have a starting point. And of course, you've got to manage this. It is not acceptable just to appoint a service provider and tell him to get on with it. You have to manage your service provider. You have to manage your building. You have to manage the use of your lift. You have to manage your planners. You have to review your plans on a regular basis to see if they're still current with the business that you're operating or how the use is being used. And particularly with the service providers. And I wouldn't be standing here if I myself was not a service provider at one time or another. It's just that I've moved on from being a service provider, and I've able to see a picture now, not only from the service provider's perspective, but actually from the design and development side and technology, and actually the developers and the owner, the eventual owners and users of it. And it's having that perspective that I realize that everything you do has to be managed. So you cannot just let the service provider alone and say, well, he's totally responsible for the lift. He needs to also have some feedback in this to the owner to tell him what is actually happening with his lift. And you have a duty to listen to him. So, just to conclude, there are a few do's that I've put down here. You have to maintain the lift so that it is safe to use. That involves having a maintenance contract that you've agreed to, that is doable, that it's manageable, and it reflects what needs to be done on that specific lift. A lot of maintenance contracts don't take that into consideration of different factors. There is a trend to have a single maintenance contract for a portfolio. Well, I'm not saying that that's the wrong way to go, but if you're going to do something like that, just be sure that you are looking at your portfolio broadly and that you're capturing all of the different types of equipment that is to be maintained, and that each individual one has been addressed as an individual and not lost in a global contract. You have to select and instruct a competent service provider. When I say instruct, you have to tell him what it is that you want to achieve, what is your plan, how you want it to be managed, and what you need out of it. A lot of the service providers do have service level agreements. Reading them though, they tend to favour the lift service provider more than what the owner of the lift needs to achieve. And in itself, there needs to be a meeting of the minds to agree on the type of service level agreement that is needed for your particular needs. You have to ensure that the lift is examined at statutory intervals and not exceed those intervals. That is mandatory, and it's always good that those statutory examinations are done by a third party. And that's not to say you must use Projitech, they're not available. But it is always good to have another set of eyes looking at it. I have great relationships with just about every service level provider who services lifts in the industry. And I like to debate and argue and discuss things from their perspective as well. And I like to be told that I'm wrong, because that gives me the basis to present my argument back to them. But you have to examine the statutory intervals. But I want to take it that one step further and say, having performed a risk assessment, you may determine that the statutory interval of 24 months is not enough. You may determine that interval needs to be decreased. And there seems to be a trend in that as well. You have to keep the service provider informed of any changes in the lift operating conditions. And that is very important, because this is where a lot of the buildings, and particularly where, and I'm going to use PWD as an example, where PWD don't own the building and they're renting premises, one suddenly finds that there's quite an increase in the population in that building, so there's therefore been a change. There's been a change in how the lift is actually used. And you might get very high peaks. When we design lift systems, we do what we call a traffic analysis study to determine what the usage of the lift is. If that usage of the lift is changed dramatically, it can affect the overall safety of the lift, and it might need that particular lift needs to have more frequent service levels. So instead of on a monthly basis, it could be on a 2-weekly basis. We had the privilege of installing a lift in the Hospital Gorge. It travels down some 50 meters in open air. Having looked at that lift, we determined that monthly intervals was not good enough. The volume that the lift is used on, thousands of people that it transports every single month, determined that the frequencies had to be checked every day, and that at least on a 2-weekly basis, that the service provider came out and did his thorough examination. You have to maintain open lines of communication with your service provider. Quite often, and as I say, a service contract has to be managed. So if your lift is breaking down frequently, there should be feedback as to why is this lift breaking down frequently. We recently had a case of when we examined a particular lift, we identified that the lift has broken down 40 times this year. Strangely, the service provider was surprised, as well as the owner of the lift. So they were both quite surprised that the lift had broken down 40 times this year. That to me showed that there's no lines of communication between the two parties in managing this as to why are there so many breakdowns. You can only imagine that the only reason that this came to light is because the tenants of the building stopped paying their rent. And the minute you stop paying your rent, somebody takes notice. The owner of the building says, oh well, I'm not getting my rent paid, why not? Well, there's no service in the building. Interestingly enough, no lines of communication. You have to act promptly to remedy any defects. Not all service providers are bad. I'm not saying that at all. Hopefully I haven't given that impression. Service level providers do, in a lot of instances, provide information where the lift needs to have major repairs done that are not contractual, or where they feel, in their opinion, that they are going to be unable to provide the level of service that the client determined that he needed up front. So, if the service provider is doing his very best in keeping that lift reliable and safe, but despite his best efforts, the lift proves to be unreliable, maybe due to changes in the building or whatever, there needs to be then that the remedy of it is effective and cost effective, and any defect is actually actioned. One of the biggest causes of concern that I have is where there's a service level agreement that provides only for labour. All parts are excluded from the contract, and when the particular provider gives a quote for 100,000 Rand for an upgrade or replacement, that there is a reluctance on the owners to actually implement. I'll give you a typical example. A step check on an escalator of a 5-meter rise will probably cost you roughly 250,000 Rand to replace. To be presented with a proposal of 250,000 Rand is not going to sit very well with the owner of the building, particularly when he hasn't been timely informed that he will be in for this sort of building. You have to please ensure that your documentation complies with all the relevant regulations. So you have to have all the documentations, you have to have a certificate that you can use the lift, you have to have the annual report, and you have to have a commissioning document. There's quite a number of documents that are there, and it's always best to have a copy of those separate from the lift. Generally speaking, those documents are available in the lift machine room. It is always best to have a copy of those documents at one side. The other thing as well is that when you own a building and you dispose of it, you have a legal obligation to inform the regulator, which is the Department of Labour, that you've disposed of that building. Otherwise, on the registration, it will always reflect your certificate. So, generally speaking, when I sell my car, I hope to get rid of it very quickly, and hopefully those parking fines and speeding fines won't catch up. But they tend to. It's the same with the lift. If your name is written there and you're the legal owner, and something goes wrong, the first person they're going to look underneath, who's the lift registered to, and they're going to be knocking on your door. Keep records of your lifts. Ensure that you get records from your service provider. All lifts are supposed to have 10 years of maintenance records. I'm talking about lifts now older than 10 years old. But you're supposed to have a history of maintenance records. So from when the lift is brand new, is that you need to maintain those records and you need to keep them for a period of 10 years. Often we find when we enter machine rooms that the records are in a little bit of disarray. So as the owner of the lift, you also have a duty to make sure that there are records available. And budget. Very important with owning a lift or even an escalator is that you actually budget for its ongoing repairs, its improvements, as they presented to you from lift service providers or consultants or whatever. As technology gets better, quite often the levels of maintenance can be reduced because the technology takes care of those type of things. But you do need to budget and you do need to listen. So having that communication with your service level provider should allow you to then budget for eventual upgrades and or replacements. Typically with the body corporate rules now, they have to put in place their 10-year maintenance plans. It's very interesting when I speak to such body corporates, I ask them what plan have you put in place for your lifts over the next 10 years, because your current lift is 30 odd years old, and in 10 years time, where do you see that lift being and what plans have you put in place for your particular lift? Thank you for listening to me.